There is an archipelago in the Atlantic Ocean that most people have never heard of. 10 volcanic islands. 500,000 people. Scattered across the ocean like dropped coins, 600 kilometers off the west coast of Africa, closer to the middle of nowhere than to anywhere. The kind of place that doesn't appear on most globes. The kind of place you'd fly over on the way to somewhere else and never look down. Cape Verde. No professional football league. No stadium that seats more than 10,000. No player in the squad who earns even a quarter of what Kylian Mbappe makes in a single week. A country whose entire population is smaller than the crowd at MetLife Stadium on World Cup final day. And on the night of July 3, 2026, in Miami, this country, this impossible, invisible, ridiculous little country, was 15 minutes away from knocking the defending world champions out of the World Cup. Argentina. Lionel Messi. The greatest player in the history of football. And Cape Verde, ranked 67th in the world, playing in their first ever World Cup, with a 40-year-old goalkeeper and a budget that wouldn't cover the catering at a Champions League quarter-final, had them level in extra time. This is the story nobody is telling. And it might be the best story this World Cup ever produced. To understand how Cape Verde got to that football pitch in Miami, you need to understand what Cape Verde actually is. Because most people don't. The islands were uninhabited until the Portuguese arrived in the 15th century. They became a way station for the transatlantic slave trade, a place where human beings were held before being shipped across the ocean to the Americas. For 500 years, Cape Verde existed in the margins of history. A colony. A footnote. A cluster of rocks in the ocean that the world used when it needed something and forgot when it didn't. Independence came in 1975. 51 years ago. That's younger than many of the coaches at this World Cup. A nation still in its infancy, still building roads and schools and hospitals, still figuring out what it means to be a country. And somehow, against every statistical probability, producing footballers. Not many. Not the assembly line of talent that Brazil manufactures, or the endless depth chart that France rolls out every 4 years. Cape Verde produces footballers the way a kitchen garden produces tomatoes, a few at a time, carefully, with enormous effort and very little soil to work with. Most of their players play in the Portuguese lower divisions. Some play in the second and third tiers of French and Belgian football. A handful have made it to decent European clubs. None of them are household names. None of them have Wikipedia pages longer than a paragraph. None of them were supposed to be here. When the World Cup draw was made, Cape Verde were placed in Group H alongside Spain, Uruguay, and Saudi Arabia. Spain, the reigning European champions who would go on to win the entire tournament. Uruguay, two-time World Cup winners with one of the proudest footballing histories on the planet. The draw was treated as a formality. The only question anyone asked about Group H was whether Spain or Uruguay would finish first. Nobody asked about Cape Verde. Nobody even mentioned them. They were the warm-up act. The mandatory underdog. The team the big nations would use to rest their star players. And then the tournament started. June 15, 2026. Atlanta. Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Spain against Cape Verde. The opening game of Group H. Spain had 27 shots. 27. Ferran Torres hit the crossbar. Oyarzabal forced a save. Laporte forced a save. Shot after shot after shot, raining down on Cape Verde's goal like artillery fire. And there, standing between the posts, 40 years old, with gloves that probably cost more than his monthly salary, was Vozinha. Cape Verde's goalkeeper. A man who had spent most of his career playing in Portugal's lower leagues, far from the spotlight, far from the money, far from any conversation about the best goalkeepers in the world. Vozinha saved everything. Not with flashy, diving, highlight reel saves, with positioning, with intelligence, with the calm of a man who has been playing professional football for nearly 2 decades, and knows exactly where the ball is going before the striker hits it. He saved from close range. He saved from distance. He saved with his feet and his hands and, at one point, with the sheer force of his refusal to let the ball cross the line. 0-0. Full time. Cape Verde had just held the European champions, the team that would go on to win the World Cup, to a draw in their first ever World Cup match. The Cape Verdean players didn't celebrate like they'd won. They celebrated like they'd just been told the universe was bigger than they thought. Hugging each other. Some of them crying. Their coaching staff standing on the touchline looking like men who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. 500,000 people back home, watching on screens in bars and living rooms and community centers across 10 islands in the middle of the Atlantic, screaming. 6 days later. Uruguay against Cape Verde. Uruguay, two-time world champions, veterans of 15 World Cups, a footballing culture so deep that their national identity is built on a match played in 1950. This was supposed to be the game where the fairy tale ended. Where the grown-ups reasserted control. Where Cape Verde learned the difference between a plucky draw and genuine competitiveness. Cape Verde drew 2-2. 2 goals against Uruguay. A team with more World Cup history than most continents. Cape Verde went behind, came back, went behind again, came back again, and walked off the pitch with a point that shouldn't have been mathematically possible according to every pre-tournament prediction model. 2 games played, 2 draws, 2 points. And suddenly, Impossibly, absurdly, Cape Verde were in the conversation. Game 3. Saudi Arabia. Another draw, 0-0. 3 games played. 3 draws. 3 points. 0 defeats. Cape Verde finished second in the group. Above Uruguay. Above Saudi Arabia. The team ranked 67th in the world, playing in their first ever World Cup, had gone through the group stage unbeaten and qualified for the knockout rounds. Uruguay, 2-time world champions, went home instead. And then came Argentina. July 3rd, Miami. Round of 32. The defending world champions against the smallest nation in the tournament. This was the game that was supposed to end the fairy tale gently. A comfortable Argentina win. A standing ovation for Cape Verde. A nice story for the end of tournament montage. Everyone goes home smiling. Messi scored first. Of course he did. A sublime touch and finish, set up by Lisandro Martinez's raking pass. 1-0 Argentina. The script was being followed. And then Cape Verde refused to read the script. They kept pushing. They kept pressing. They kept running. These players from Portuguese second divisions and Belgian third tiers, running at defenders who play for Manchester United and Atletico Madrid and Inter Milan, running like men who understood that this was the only time in their lives they would ever be on a pitch like this, and they were not going to waste a single second of it. Regulation time ended 1-0. Extra time began. Lisandro Martinez scored to make it 2-1. The coffin was being nailed shut. And then Sidny Cabral did something that nobody in Cape Verde, nobody on the planet, will ever forget. He picked up the ball on the left wing. An innocent position. Nothing threatening. No obvious danger. The kind of moment that happens 1,000 times in every football match and leads to absolutely nothing. Cabral cut inside. 1 touch. He looked up. And from 25 yards, he curled a strike around Emiliano Martinez. The best penalty-saving goalkeeper in the world. The man who had won a World Cup doing exactly this, stopping exactly these kinds of shots. And into the top corner. 2-2. The stadium erupted. Not for Argentina. For Cape Verde. Neutral fans, American fans, fans of countries that had been eliminated weeks ago, all of them on their feet screaming for a volcanic archipelago in the Atlantic that most of them had Googled for the first time 3 weeks earlier. Cabral ran. He ran past the corner flag, past the advertising boards, into the stands, into the arms of Cape Verdean fans who were sobbing. Completely, visibly, uncontrollably sobbing. For 15 minutes, 500,000 people were on the verge of the greatest upset in World Cup history. And then, in the final seconds, Cape Verde won a free kick. A dangerous position. 22 yards out. Cabral, the man who had just scored one of the goals of the tournament, stood over it. The stadium held its breath. He hit it beautifully. Dipping, curling, heading for the top corner. And Martinez, with the reflexes of a man who has spent his entire career preparing for exactly this moment, flew to his right and pushed it over the bar. Argentina survived. 3-2 after an own goal gave them the lead again in the dying minutes. Cape Verde were out. But nobody in that stadium was thinking about Argentina. After the final whistle, Fox Sports analyst Stu Holden looked into the camera and said something that cut through the noise of the entire tournament. Cape Verde. Thank you, on behalf of the world. You made us dream and watch your dreams lived out in real time. We'll never forget you. That's what this was. Not just an underdog story. Not just a plucky minnow having their moment. This was a country of 500,000 people walking into the biggest sporting event on earth and refusing, absolutely refusing, to be small. They drew with the team that won the tournament. They drew with 2-time world champions. They took the defending champions to extra time and scored a goal that will be replayed in highlight reels for the next 50 years. And they did it with a 40-year-old goalkeeper, a squad of players whose combined market value is less than Mbappe's left boot, and a nation back home that had never dared to dream this big. Here's what the numbers say about Cape Verde's World Cup. 0 defeats in regulation time. 3 group games, 3 draws, not a single loss in 90 minutes across the entire tournament. The only team eliminated from the 2026 World Cup without losing a game in normal time. The numbers also say that Cape Verde's annual football budget is approximately what Manchester City spends on a single player's weekly wages. That their domestic league has no promotion or relegation because there aren't enough teams. That their national stadium, the Estadio Nacional in Praia, seats 8,000 people, fewer than some English League Two grounds. The numbers say all of that. And the numbers mean absolutely nothing compared to what happened on that pitch in Miami. There's a moment from the Argentina game that didn't make the highlight reels. After Cabral's goal, the equalizer, the impossible curling strike that made the entire world stand up, there's footage from the Cape Verdean bench. The substitutes, the coaches, the medical staff. They aren't cheering. They aren't jumping. They're standing perfectly still, hands on their heads, mouths open, staring at the pitch as if what they've just witnessed has physically broken their ability to react. One of the substitute players is on his knees. Not in celebration. In disbelief. The kind of disbelief that comes when reality exceeds the absolute outer limit of what you thought was possible. That's what Cape Verde did at the 2026 World Cup. They exceeded the outer limit. They showed 500,000 people, and through them, the entire world, that football does not belong to the rich or the powerful, or the historically dominant. It belongs to anyone stubborn enough to believe they deserve to be on that pitch. Cape Verde went home without winning a single game. They went home without a trophy or a medal or a place in the quarterfinals. But they went home having done something that Spain and France and Argentina and England, with all their billions and all their history, cannot buy at any price. They made the whole world fall in love with them. Somewhere in Praia right now, on a dusty concrete pitch overlooking the Atlantic, a kid is kicking a ball against a wall. She's wearing a Cape Verde shirt, the same blue shirt that Cabral wore when he curled that shot past Martinez. She watched it happen on a screen in a bar because her family doesn't have a television. She watched Vozinha save everything Spain threw at him. She watched her country stand toe-to-toe with the best and refuse to blink. And she's thinking what every kid in every small country in the world is now thinking. If they can do it, why not us? 500,000 people. 10 islands. 1 World Cup. And a story the world will never forget.